Because I have a question that I've been dying to ask you for weeks. And Alex is grinning because literally this question has I almost
Literally,
asked
I
you.
I told him I wasn't gonna ask it because I want him to ask it. It's an amazing question. Go ahead, Willie.
So I feel like now more than ever, with the internet, with books, with all the resources that is provided to us, I feel like this generation is very intact with their history. So my question to you is, do you think that it's harder for an African American kid or student to be taught Black history from someone that's not an African American? Do you think it's harder for them to? Do you think it's hard for that teacher to reach the African American crowd? Because a lot of kids have the mindset like you don't understand. You your background is you don't understand where I come from. It's no way you can sit here and teach this because you're just going off of a book. You really don't feel what I feel when you speak on it. So do you think it's hard to connect for them to connect with the African American students?
Wouldn't I would say, like anything else.
That's a
I'm
fantastic
gonna
question,
take
by
a
the way.
sip of my
Thank you.
alkaline water if you don't mind here.
I'll go right ahead. I'm gonna take a sip too.
But I got to know Willie is alkaline.
Okay. Yeah.
It's purified.
Yeah. It's the natural alkaline. It's not reverse osmosis.
What's up, everybody? It's Willie and Alex from the Black Culture Podcast. I know you ready to get into this video, but before you do that,
Make sure to subscribe to our channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Black Culture Podcast.
enjoy the video.
Willie, man, so it's a very special interview tonight. You know how much I love Black history, and I'm always talking about it.
Yes, sir.
And we actually just came out of Black History Month, but with me, it's always Black History Year. We got a special guest on the podcast tonight that was introduced to us by the great Ron Johnson.
The
Uh,
great Ron Johnson. I gave him that name, by the way.
yeah,
Yeah.
man. And you know what? The great thing about him, he referred somebody that said, "Look, we want experts on here," and this person isn't just an expert; she's an educator, a consultant, humanitarian. She teaches the African American Family Life course at CSU. And for those our audience don't know which CSU, that's Cleveland State University. She also teaches the Black Studies course, which is an introduction into the study of people of African descent in the United States and the linkages to the African diaspora. Man, I'm excited. Welcome to the podcast, Miss Yolanda Burt.
Oh, thank you, sirs. Thank you both. It's a pleasure to be referred by, of course, Ron Johnson, he is such a leader in the community and who he is, and then for you gentlemen and your this platform that you are providing for not only myself but others through your Black Culture podcast. I think it's phenomenal, and I commend you. I commend you both for the vision that you have and to use this platform that you've been given. So
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much.
much. Thank you.
And before we get started, we have a Black Culture Podcast tradition that
Yeah, you forgot all season one.
I'm quickly not forgetting in season 2. Let's go ahead and toast it up.
all right, blessings. Alkaline water here.
Oh, that's what I'm drinking.
All right, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's up. So let's go ahead and get into it. We just got out of Black History Month, which for honestly, even for myself, a lot of us in this country is a time to not just learn, but to reflect on all of, I would say from the beginning of our start in this land all the way up until now. And there's so much African American history that we just don't know. And usually when we think about Black people in this country, the first thing we want to start off with is slavery, right? But there was a beginning that far exceeds slavery and it goes well before that. And so with your studies, I wanted to get into the time before we came to America. Okay. So if you wouldn't mind, take us on a little bit of a journey and take us back to the time, where our ancestors were in chains and whips, because that's not where we started.
Absolutely. And again, that is it's always the missing piece of when we have either Black history or even through our textbooks and from the elementary on up, actually into the collegiate levels, oftentimes that is it. But we ought to know, we ought to be aware and to share that our history, the history of the people of African descent, did not start with slavery. And I will take you back to some of the kingdoms. There's many kingdoms and great civilizations from the African diaspora and the people originating from the continent of Africa, which we all people do. But if we focus on some of the kingdoms, we can start in the northern kingdoms. So we can start what we call Egypt, which is really Kemet. Kemet means it means black. It means black, but it's black, the soil, the rich soil from the fertile Nile, the soil, and also there's other words again that the Cushite people used and others used, and which meant beloved land and motherland, and that's where we get that term motherland. So there's other words other than with the when the Europeans or those from Arabic nations came in and called Egypt. So, but we're going to go with Kemet and Cush and Nubia, because all of these kingdoms from the north, which was Kemet or Egypt, Kemet, all the way through down through the following the Nile. These are the civilizations that were surrounding the Nile River. So if we come down and we talk about the Cushites, the Cush, and then talking about Nubia, and going into southern Sudan. So we will have all these nations that were really one. They weren't separate. So it's really an oxymoron when we see black pharaohs or black. That's because those are all one people, not separate as we would portray today, or sometimes it's the oftentimes with the Eurocentric view of the world. There's an effort to make the northern part of the continent, the motherland, Europeanized or even Arabic, but that is not the case. We know that with the pharaohs that were just as much a part of, a matter of fact, from the south up, the southern part of the kingdom up with Nubia and Cush, and we can see Meroe, which was one of the leading cities.
Hey guys, it's Willie from the Black Culture Podcast. I know you're enjoying this dope interview, but before you continue,
make sure to like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Black Culture Podcast.
Of the empire there, those kingdoms. So when we talk about those kingdoms, we know that Nubia actually had more pyramids than Egypt had, even more pyramids. And we know that with these kingdoms, there was sometimes again, looking at how Western history, Western civilization, that there wasn't it was a separation, not an equality between male and female, but not so with the leadership, with the kingdoms of Nubia and Cush and Kemet. We see that the female rulers ruled just as much as the male rulers. So we see those are some of the distinctions. And these are, again, very vast kingdoms that had trade throughout the world. This trade, again, in that known world, from Asia all the way into some parts of Europe, we see the trade going on. So we see these great civilizations. Then again, that's just to be short about it with those kingdoms. And if we would move then to our western part of the continent, and we can see the ancient kingdoms of Ghana and Mali and Sangay, we'll put those grouped together, because with the as they expansion of the kingdoms, we see the great one of the what you would see on some even in high school, you might have seen on some maps, some old European maps or Portuguese maps or Spanish maps, and you see this black man with gold in his hand. He said, well, you never thought who that was. So that's King Mesa Musa. Mesa means King Mesa Musa, and he was one of the richest man in the world at that time. And that kingdom that he expanded continued to really, again, not only with the trade and exploration, but the wealth of that country, and not only the wealth, but the intellectual wealth of that country. We see one of the oldest universities in the world there, the Sankore Institute, or Sankore University in Timbuktu. And we know that by the history and the trade of books. And that's why you got to watch what we say, the terrible myths that, that we need to really stop. Like if you want something hidden, put it from a black person, put it in a book. Wrong. Books was a trade. You hear the knowledge, people came from all over the world, from over the world for the Sankore Institute. So we would see those things and know that these kingdoms, and we know that another one of the kings that really was a predecessor to King Mesa Musa, Akbar II, really was the person that traveled, and we had the evidence, archaeological evidence of him arriving to the New World, South America, north of the Americas before Columbus. And he then left with his ships. He took, I think, over 1,000 men on the ships with him. And that's why his successor then took over the kingdom. So we see all this history, and these are legacies that we should share with our children and with our children's children, so they would know. All right, so then if we go to the eastern part of the continent, and
so hold on one second, because you are getting into it, and
okay, I can slow down.
No, you're good. So there's a lot to unpack. I wanted to go back to ancient Kemet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was never really, I never really knew what timeline that was in. So how far back are we talking when we talk about Kemet, Nubia, Sudan,
Oh,
Ethiopia?
absolutely. You're talking about the BC. Okay, so that's the era before. Well, they would say in the terminology today, before the Christian era. You would look at that. You would look at that time frame, and you would move it all the way up until the 3rd and 5th century AD. All of these, yeah, absolutely. You're talking about early civilization, early history. So while Europe was still in its dark ages, Africa was in its golden age. So that's what we can look at. And we can look at some of what we would consider, as you probably learned in school, as we all have, about Greek history and Socrates and Plato. But we know that through a lot of the writings of not only Greeks, but others, a lot of the Arab writers would say the same. They would come to learn from the Africans, and Hopetip. We come and learn from the Africans. So it wasn't a secret. It wasn't something hidden by any means, that this knowledge would come through the other parts of the world from Africa. Now we have to always remember that Africa is the heart of civilization, for all mankind, all humankind. So we can see that the myths about it being the primitive and undeveloped. Any areas in the world have that. Any areas, anywhere you would go, would have areas that are remote. But again, the civilizations, which were again back 2,000 years ago. Okay, over 2,000 years ago. Thousands.
Yeah, I think it's been
clear about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's been proven that that the oldest the oldest fossil from a human was found in Ethiopia, right?
That's correct. That is correct. And when I went to Ethiopia, they have See, I'm not gonna mess up the name. Your Greeks say Lucy, but I'm not gonna mess up the name. I wish I could speak that more clearly. A Menadish is something to that nature, and I'm a
Is
hard.
it Amharic? Yeah, Amharic.
It's
Yeah.
Amharic is the language of the majority language of Ethiopia. The oldest language in Ethiopia is Ge'ez, which is one of the oldest written languages in the world, and that's where I was going to go when we're talking about the eastern part of Africa, and we see the kingdom of Aksum, and Abyssinia, which you know Abyssinia, right? Abyssinia, and that's the name for Ethiopia. And that was the horn at the time. It was not landlocked, you know, because it would encompass Eritrea and Somalia, Eritrea, and then Ethiopia, and somewhat of Kenya would all be a part of this kingdom area. Again, we put, you know, it's just now, you know, borders and things, you know, things of that nature, and we take that back to the scramble for Africa, back with the Berlin conference, but that's another story. But if you're looking at the early kingdoms, again, we're talking about we're going into again BC with these kingdoms, and then going into the different dynasties with the Abyssinia. People don't realize that, again, a lot of myths, and one of them is about Europe or Christianity being Europe or Western, where it's the opposite. All of these, the first Christian nation in the world, called Christian nation in the world, was in Ethiopia by King Azana. Okay, and this is in the 4th and 5th, well, they say 1st AD, but really 2nd and 3rd AD. Okay, you were talking about, and prior to that, they were a Jewish nation, Queen Yodith. We say Judith in English, but it would be Yodith, Yodit, and with the rulers of Aksum. And we know that this is again throughout the history and legacy of Ethiopia, claiming the Solomonic dynasty, calling from King Solomon's heirs on down with King Menelik I, who is said to be the son of the Queen of Sheba of Ethiopia and King Solomon. But anyway, regardless of that, we know that the historians and that, like, again, architect, this is the science of it, that the evidence is there, that again, these are early, from the architecture on. You can see that these strong civilizations, dynasties, cities, again, trade, commerce, all of these things, part of these kingdoms. And not to, you know, so that's just to name a few. And if we could just go on down the line, and if we go, okay, we start with the east, so let's go to the central part in the Congo, the great kingdom of the Congo, the central part of Africa. We have, again, all of these, and they traded with one another, again, with these different divisions that we have with borders and so forth. It was trade enter within the continent, and then trade that they would do outside of the continent. And we really see evidence that, and even in the southern part of Africa, with the kingdom was called Great Zimbabwe, and the Zulu people. And we have all of these dynasties here, and we have evidence of the Ming Dynasty China pottery being found in Zimbabwe, where they would do trade. You see what I'm saying? So again, it's not that Africa is being it is that it's being portrayed as something being isolated in the dark continent, meaning unexplored, and waiting for the European community or governments, systems, or whatever, to discover them. They were well known, and they were trading back and forth, and that's what made the whole institution of global enslavement of African people so insidious because they were well aware of the history, well aware of the natural resources, well aware because of the trade that had been taking place. So we
Yolanda,
all,
I have a question.
yes, I can
So
stop me in mid-trade.
no, it's fine. It's fine because you just gave so much knowledge and so much, like everything you just said. I did not learn this in high school. Like Alex said before, they started immediately from slavery. So if you can, and I know a lot of our listeners and our viewers just learned a lot too. Where do you think that started at, to where they was just like, you know what, forget the rest of the history, forget what happened before slavery? What made the decision for them to say just knowing about slavery was the only importance and not what happened before then? Because they just start just you learn about Harriet Tubman, you learn about Rosa Parks, but you don't, they're not teaching us about what the knowledge you just given us. So like, where did that start, where they just came to this conclusion, like, you know what, we're gonna start them right off with slavery? And like, what, where, how did that happen?
Well, it started when, I have to go back again. If you look at how history evolved itself and looking at the justification of the enslavement of people from Africa or African descent, there had to be in the mindset a justification for it. Because in the human spirit, it would still, no matter how horrible somebody would be, you'd have to feel some kind of way about enslaving someone and human beings. So it had to start with the mindset or this ideology that Africans, people from Africa, had no history, had no civilization, in order to justify going in and
I love what you're saying. I love it.
had to go in and strip people, kidnap folk, rob them of their culture, forbidding them to use their language, forbidding them to use the talking drum because they know that was a communication piece. All of these things. So if you think about it from the beginning, when we were talking about even in the 1400s with the Portuguese coming in to Africa to start this way before the 1609, Jamestown, right? So if you have all these things in place to justify, then you have to keep that going. You have to keep that story going. You have to keep in the mindset of a people in order to keep someone enslaved mentally, that you don't have a history, that you don't have a tradition, that you don't have a culture. And if you put these things in systematically through education, through the medical field, through so-called science, so making up of fields like anthropology at that time, thank God everything has changed now. But at that time, you have to put all these false narratives in place. And in order to justify, in order for you to feel all right about what you're doing, that, starting from the worst case, that they weren't even human, right? To backing off of that a little bit, human, but not so much, but inferior, but lacking culture, lacking these things. Again, even going back from the false religious paradigm of, okay, we have to Christianize, and knowing that most of them were already Christian before you got there. But how can we enslave people that so again, all of these things, and we just see it as it comes to the 21st century, that yet these truths are trying to, be hidden because you still have this same narrative going on. If you still believe that we have to control the wealth of the continent, or control the wealth and the resources, because they don't really know. They're just getting independent. They're just getting they're getting restored back to what was taken, but it's still the ramifications of these centuries and centuries and centuries of, and again, look at, we can just take a little peek at what's been just right in America as far as what's going on. Why should we even need something that says Black Lives Matter if these things still don't resonate with people, that the humanness, that the rightfulness, the divine right of African people, of human beings. And then you have to still justify what great grandfather did, or whatever the case may be, or the forefathers did. And you have to justify. So let's just keep, why did we do that if they already had their own? Why did we raise so many questions? But thankfully, people are willing to ask, and I see that in my class. People want to know. They say, now, wait a minute. Something's not, wait a minute, what's going on? Why did we not?
Before you jump into that class, because I'm glad you brought in your class into it, because I have a question that I've been dying to ask you for weeks. And Alex is grinning because literally this question has
Literally,
I
I told him I wasn't gonna ask it because I want him to ask it. It's an amazing question. Go ahead, Willie.
So I feel like now more than ever, with the internet, with books, with all the resources that is provided to us, I feel like this generation is very intact with their history. So my question to you is, do you think that it's harder for an African American kid or student to be taught Black history from someone that's not an African American? Do you think it's harder for them do you think it's hard for that teacher to reach the African American crowd? Because, a lot of kids have the mindset like, you don't understand. Your background is you don't understand where I come from. It's no way you can sit here and teach this because you're just going off of a book. You really don't feel what I feel when you speak on it. So do you think it's hard for them to connect with the African American students?
I would say, like anything else.
That's a fantastic
I'm gonna
question,
take
by
a
the way.
sip of my
Thank you.
alkaline water, if you don't mind here.
I'll go right ahead. I'm gonna take a sip too.
But I got to know, Willie, is it alkaline though?
Okay, yeah.
It's purified.
Yeah, it's the natural alkaline. It's not the reverse osmosis stuff. But anyway, I would say that, like anything else, it's when you see someone that looks like you, be it in that classroom or on the corporate floor or whatever field, you feel more empowered when you're hearing it from someone and seeing it. It's like anything. If you're if you're in the medical field and you see doctors that look like you're more encouraged and empowered to do that. Not to say that if you had a mentor or someone that wasn't a person of color that had that, and I talk about in my class the Black consciousness, and interestingly enough, the majority of the students in my class are not African American. So I say in our class, we're all especially African American family class. We're all everybody in this class is part of the African American family class, because there's a thing about consciousness. You can have the heart, so to speak, and the awareness of the Black experience because you want to know, because you care, as opposed to those that are in the field or whatever that don't care about the African American experience. So I would say that I'm sure it's more of a challenge for that person that's instructing, if they're not a person of color, if they're not African American. However, if they can really portray or display their heart and their care about those experiences and tell the truth about the history, because that's what people really want to hear. They want to know the truth. They want to know the facts. So whatever vehicle, whomever that vehicle is, that is giving that truth, I think it would be received, because at the end of the day, that's what the students, that what anybody wants to hear. They don't want to have part of their history told. They want the whole history. So whoever is conveying that, whoever can communicate that, let them communicate it. But
You know,
again,
that's a great point, because what a lot of us don't know is that as Americans, I think there's 40, 50 million of us. There's 200 million whites in this country. A lot of them travel to Africa way more than we do. There's a lot of African Americans who've never even been to Africa. But I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of them do know the history. There's a lot of white educators who don't teach the history, but they know the history, right? But I want to throw a curveball at you. Okay. So we've been called so many names throughout our time here in this land. I'm not even sure what they called us when we first got here, but from history, we've been called everything from nigga to Negro to colored to African American to Afro American. Now it's back to people of color, right? All these different names, which I mean says a lot for our identity, because it's actually someone else choosing our identity. When did that start? When did that trend of, okay, let's continue to rename them so they can never develop identity and sort of a cohesive culture on their own, into now we're just being called black? Which only issue I have with that is I was born in America. I should be considered American. We call everybody else by their country name, by the name of their nation, and all we get is a color, which to me is a disconnect from Africa. And I think they know that. But can you expound on that a little bit as to when that started?
okay, now just to give an overview of that, I would go into again the global enslavement. They were very aware, well, of what we called one another. Then you were Cushite, you were from whichever particular kingdom, your Axumite, or whatever particular group from the Zegwe or Ashanti, Ibu. So we weren't describing each other then based on, definitely not color. Color was irrelevant. Definitely not the skin color, but just from your family group or your kindred group or your nation group, as I mentioned. Okay, so the awareness of that was very clear. So then when the Europeans came in, the Portuguese, for example, and see dark, red, Negro, black, which is black in Spanish, as you probably already know, that's where you get that from. Okay, and then it was just more of a demeaning sort of thing. And not to be calling people. And another, if I can go there, and I will go there, they would know back to
Go
this.
there.
Okay, I thank you. With this misnomer with the Christianity Bible, they knew that if you can read and if you call yourself a Cushite, well, Cush is all through the Bible, right? Over 44 times, right? Okay, Ethiopians, it's all through,
Yep.
all through the word of
Yep.
the Bible. So if you take those, they go, oh no, they'll recognize themselves. They'll recognize themselves. They know Ethiopians, they know Cushites, they know, okay, they know that from Cyrene, they know these places. So if you take that out and just put this label, this made up Negro, black, or the black, or then you that's that disconnect. I take that connection away, connection from your continent, connection from your history, connection from your people. I take that away and I replace it with my narrative. And that's what we do. And I mentioned the university, but I also talk about the Mount Pleasant Heritage House. And that's what we want to do, to make people know of that awareness that you have a goodly heritage. And that heritage is that identity, that connection that you have. And I agree that to allow people, and that's again part of what we do, the Mount Pleasant Heritage House, to tell your own story. Because if you let somebody else tell your story, this is what you end up with. You end up someone telling you who you are, labeling you who you are. So that's the whole point, and you're right on point, Eric, with that being called, and that's why I say, generally speaking, when I'm talking, I don't say white, I say European Americans. I say African Americans, unless I know that somebody, like they call themselves an Italian American or, from Italy or whatever. But in general, if you're just making a general statement, European American, you want to make a general statement, African American, and that's how I see it as well. Because those other, unless we get it down to where exactly that we're doing. My husband is really into genealogy, and he does his tracing. He took the DNA. My daughter gave him that for Father's Day, and he traced from the Berbers, which is northern part of Africa. But anyway,
I'm actually glad you brought that up. Stay right there, because my next question is this. So I have a buddy. He's from South Sudan, the Dinka tribe, and we talked many times because his culture is very different than here. In fact, when he came here, he came to this country as a refugee, and he didn't even understand money because they had a completely different type of culture. But he said when he came here, they told him, don't talk to those Black Americans, right? He said, don't talk to those Black Americans. In fact, he told me this, and he and I can discuss without emotion, right? We're just quoting facts. He said, we call you Black Americans, we are the African Americans, right? I have another buddy of mine, his wife is Liberian, and she has, if you saw her walking down the street, you would just call her Black, right? Because we all look alike. But her culture and our culture is completely different. So she doesn't understand, quote unquote, Black history as far as the way we understand it, that connection with it. So here's my question. How important is it for us as African Americans to reconnect with Africa and to learn the cultural differences as well as the similarities? Because so many of us talk about all the differences, but there's so many similarities in almost every facet of our cultures. But how important is it for us, because we just talked about disconnection, but how important is it for us to reconnect?
Oh, I love it. Thank you for that question. We have at our university, the African Student Alliance, and a part of that is that bridging of the gaps, is a part of that bridging of the gaps. And I would echo your story. My husband and I, our son, he calls us mom and dad. He's from Ethiopia. When I went to over a period of 3 years, was in Ethiopia, and at the time he was just still in high school. And to make a long story short, he came to live with my husband and I right after he graduated from high school. And of course, lived with us, and now he's got his degree and got his graduate degree, and is married and I'm a grandma with his wife just had a child, and anyway, the story is this, told the exact same thing. If you go to be a host parent, and listen to what they say, like you're going to come to Cleveland, make sure you live on the west side, don't live on the east side. They are told, that they're directed on who to be around. And one of my our good friend who's Ethiopian too, and lives in California, and she's livid about that. She said, "You're telling me to fear my own people?" She recognized it. You're telling me to fear my own people, the people, they look like me. And you're telling me to fear them, to stay away from them. But again, you got to go back. It's all part of that same narrative, that justification narrative, that they're keeping that superiority myth going, and that difference is separate going. So it's critically important that we bridge those gaps. And then when you come together, you find it's just a wonderful thing. And when you go to the continent, if you like you have said, you go to Africa, and they'll tell you, welcome home. That's what I was told. Welcome home. And people will come up to me and start speaking to them Amharic, thinking that I was Ethiopian. And this, it's a connection there. And we talk and we gather our just again, and just to coming together and to talk. And other, like say friends that from Nigeria, same, the same thing. But when we come together, that's why it's important for us to come together when they have, because of the pandemic, they probably won't. But every year, my husband and I go to the Nigerian celebrate in Cleveland. Their celebration, their independence celebration, is always in at the Civic there in the Cleveland Heights. And last year was another spot, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Seek those things out. We have to make an effort. We have to make be intentional about reaching out to have those conversations with one another, so we can see like, well, what's really behind this thing keeping us separate, making you feel that you're different than I am. Well, of course, we're different in nationality because I'm an American and you're Nigerian, or you're from Liberia, or you're from the Sudan. But at the end of the day, we come from the same biological history roots, and that's Africa. That's our common ground. And that's our common, we're all, there's one race, we know it's the human race, we know this. But as it relates to our ethnic groups, our families, our kindred, okay, nationality, ethnic group, we know that those are the commonalities that we have with one another. And when we talk and we celebrate, all those things come right on out. Those things, those similarities, those common threads, the values. And that's what we talk about too, those traditional African values that you can still see today in that African American family. That African proverb about it takes a village to raise a child. We see that in our everyday experience, in the part of the Black experience. We see that in our tonal language, we see the rhythms of our voices, all of these threads. We see our aptitude for our sciences. We see our aptitude for our math competency. We see these things that we've been told we don't have. But when we peel them back, we do, because that's part of our gifts that every people have gifts that they've been given. That's one of our gifts, another one of our gifts. Not just the music, not just but these other gifts that we're given, that we can see that comes straight from our ethnic roots. And when we talk about those things, that's why the dialogue is so important. It's like the platform is like this. When we talk about these things and have an opportunity to engage with our other brothers and sisters from Africa, we'll see more and more of those common threads, and not just how we look, but
I have one for you. I have one for you. So, what do you think now, as far as this generation now and the generation coming after them? What do you think we all could do and they can do to make sure our history continues to go on, but in a positive way now, not with those, like, to stop those narratives, to put a stop to those stereotypes, the fake news, as people call it? What can this generation do also to help the generation coming behind them to make sure they are educated to know the correct history?
That's an awesome question, brother. Awesome
Thank you,
question.
sir.
Good question, and I will hopefully give the answer. What I can just do what I believe, okay? And that is books. Read. There's so many children's books that talk about our African heritage. There's so many, because there's really no excuse now, because your generation is the information generation. So you have it on this internet. You can look up some, I would say, credible sources. Let me put it that way. Credible sources that would help to get you the knowledge. You don't have to, and of course, everybody wants, going on to higher education. That's wonderful. But I'm talking about for the children, for the little ones. It can start with the little ones, just as other cultures teach their on their knees, teaching their children sitting, their little babies on their laps, sitting on their knees. They teach them their history. We need to do the same. Through children's books, through what you're learning, and just repeat the story. We do have our oral tradition. Yes, we have our books, and we've already established that we have a long history of written language, but our oral tradition is powerful. So as you continue to share those stories, their history, you share it with the children, your little brothers and sisters, whoever, the nephews, nieces, you share these stories, you share your history, they're not going to forget it if you keep sharing it and passing it on. What I'm very hopeful about this generation, which is different than my generation, so to speak, when you that the negative, so much negative about Africa, when they say, "Oh, you're African," that was supposed to be an insult, which was terrible. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's going to segue into what I wanted to ask you.
Did I answer your question there, Willie? Did I answer?
Yes, you did.
Books
Yes,
and
you
just
did.
sharing it orally, having this and reading to your children, reading to the young ones, talking about it, and passing on that oral history. It's powerful. What we say out of our mouth is powerful. So keep speaking life about our people, and that's
Yes.
how we're going to carry it on.
I love that. Thank you.
You're
No,
welcome.
yeah, that was a great answer. I remember being a kid and my mother would always tell me, you come from kings, right? And here's what's funny about that. And then I'm gonna go into my question. My brother from Sudan that I told you about, this is the guy who can look at you and tell your ancestral heritage, right?
Mhm.
So I remember one day we were just sitting together and I'm showing him pictures of people. I was like, yeah, where's he from? Where are they from? Where blah blah blah. And I had the answer, but he could just look at a picture and tell where you're from.
Mm.
He said this to me because he knows both of my parents. He knows my mother and he knows my father. He said, I can look at your mother and tell where she's from. I can look at your father and tell where he's from. He said, your mother is Nubian. And he said back then, he's like, because y'all all look alike, I can just tell exactly where you're from. And he said, they were kings. He said they were actually, because he got this information growing up. And his tribe is actually some of the tallest people in the world. Like his uncle is Manute Bo, his cousin is Luol Deng. Like he knows these people actually. But he was like, yeah, I could tell you this. I learned this growing up. Anyway, here's my question, which is why I brought that up. How important is it? You said your husband is really heavily into genealogy. How important is it for us to take those DNA tests? And if we take them or if we don't take them, how important is it for us to go to Africa and visit motherland?
I'm not a big proponent of DNA testing, only because I'm not a conspiracy person, but I just always wonder, what people do with information. So I'm not pushing that, even though that's what my husband did, and which is great. But there's other ways to trace, and that's the traditional way of just going through, just the research of the archives of we went to Centerville, Alabama. I think it was a very small town, to look at some of those, the wills, where they willed African Americans like they did, furniture or livestock, and get those research and then tracing, and that just going back into some of those archives way. But anyway, but I know it's modern day with that, but I'll leave that part of it alone. But the other part, it is important, I think, that if when people are able to go to the continent and to just to have that experience of being in the motherland, to just to have that experience, putting your feet on that soil, and just to reconnect with the land and the people there. I think that maybe it's a goal for if anyone would have in their lifetime just to do. But we know that's if it's not possible. My dad and my mom didn't do that, but my parents always taught us, like like you described about your parents. They taught us a lot of this history. That I think that's what the love of it comes from. It's not from school, but from my parents. They taught us all of that. They taught us our history. They taught us about Africa and the kingdoms and the people. And we came up with that with like feeling good about when somebody calls you Black or African, you didn't like, oh, well, thank you. It was a different response because you knew who you were and that identity. And that's why, again, it's important for us to stop hurting ourselves with this negative voices that we tell ourselves, and then sometimes we say out to others. That's the thing that we can do. You don't have to travel to Africa to have that love in your heart for your people. But again, it's a great blessing if we do have that opportunity. But that's not necessary when it's really the heart. And then we talk about, again, going back to that consciousness. If you have that own sense of appreciation and recognition of who you are and where you came from, then it doesn't matter what others say, or if you never had a DNA test, or if you already know. I don't need to know. I already know who I am, that I am a royal priesthood. I am a chosen generation. I am who God says I am.
Is
And
that
that's
Israel and New Breed that you just quoted? I remember that song.
who God says who I am. Yes.
That's awesome. Let's get into this. I wanted to ask you this question, but I wanted you to jump into the African diaspora because being American, it's often said that if you speak two languages, you're bilingual. If you speak three languages, you're trilingual. But if you're American, you probably only speak one language. We don't speak or really understand the world outside of this, I would say, reality that's been created for us until you actually leave. We actually had a good friend of mine on by the name of Taye Ahuru, guy I've known for many years. He's been to over 60 countries throughout the world and obviously visits Africa often. Um, he's taken that journey, but he's seen us all over the world and all of these other countries and cities. Get into that because you also teach that. Um, and I hate to use slavery as a reference point, but wasn't 4 out of every 10 captured taken to South America, and then the rest distributed amongst the Caribbean, West Indies, and then all the way up to the United States, et cetera, et cetera. Can you get into the African diaspora and we as a people all over the world and why it's important for us to know that as well?
Oh, absolutely. And that's another point of division when we see we say African Americans, but people of African descent for the Caribbean, and knowing that our histories, we have that's our histories are the same, even though, again, those colonized, between imperialism and colonialism, and then putting those first persons that were brought to the South America and to the islands and then to the Americas. I think we need to have another dialogue because sometimes there's a disconnect um, between those that are from African descent that are in the islands And those, again, it's a similar narrative that's been given to them as to our African
Absolutely.
brothers.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, they fed the same line, and that's all part of that, keep that division going. And then, they'll go back to the enslavement of with the different skin, with colorism. And that that's another thing, all of that, it plays into the narrative of division. So within the diaspora, that we have to, and that's part of what we do talk about often, and the appreciation of all the cultures throughout the African diaspora, the awareness and teaching about those from the different groups that are in, for example, in Brazil, and then being heavily discriminated against in Brazil and other parts of the world throughout the diaspora. So we can see again, it's the lack of educational opportunities, the lack of opportunities for economic growth and wealth building in all parts of the world as it relates to people of African descent. So why is that? Again, to keep this whole narrative going, that we, again, to keep the layers of classism and layers of racism, classism going, that someone has to be the superior one. So the closer you are to the appearance of a European American, the better off you are. So all of those things, and it's just so much that we can peel back. But that's why the dialogue, for us to always know that we come from that same heritage and how we got there from the same, outside of those that explored. We're not talking about the before Christopher Columbus exploration folk. We're talking about the rest of us that got here because of the global enslavement of people from Africa. And then we had the diaspora. So we had those common threads that we need to say, no, we need all to always know that who we are and our identity as a people, and in bringing together and not separating on the base of where we are. If you're here and I'm in Grenada and you're in Ohio, no, we need to know that we're yet one people.
Why is it cool to be Black now? So me growing up, my partner growing up, my parents, my grandparents, of course, your grandparents and whatnot. It wasn't cool to be Black, and it also wasn't cool to be African. But now, because I can remember even being in school, I had a couple African classmates, and because we didn't know any better, we talked out of ignorance. But now it's cool to be Black. It's cool to be African. Why do you think that is all of a sudden in 2020, 2021?
I'm going to think positive about that. And I'm going to say, because of the awareness and exposure, even if you're going to use a Marvel comic book, like about Black Panther, if you're going to use as a way to bring pride and to bring awareness, then so be it. So again, I think that awareness, I think that the media through people of notoriety, famous people, be it actors or athletes, that are showing their pride on who they are and who they. I think that's making it. That's an influence. Let's be real about that. That's going to be an influence on the young people, and that they can see that wearing their hair natural, or all the other things, and being seeing darker complected African American females in leading roles, that changing this whole ideology of what beauty is. All of these things play a part in Black being cool, or being in it is okay. If you're, oh, you're dark. Oh, thank you. And we're coming out of those things, so that hindrances and all those ways in which that we were portraying, really inflicting self-hatred on our, and being manifested because of this internalizing the negative narratives that we were receiving about what it is to be Black. And I think it's a breakthrough, again, from my standpoint, that young people are not buying that narrative wholly as in past generations. So I would think that may be a reason for that.
Mm, awesome. Awesome answer, which I hope that that gets even better, right? Because
Absolutely.
I'll tell you one of the things that shocked me, and just because I'm a man and I didn't know this, I grew up not realizing the scrutiny dark skinned women went through,
Mm.
right? And my mom's dark skinned, but she never really talked about it. I never realized the amount of shame that they were meant to feel. But I bring that up simply because of this. The man, we go out, we work, we provide, but it's the woman who teaches the culture and who sort of creates that environment for a culture to thrive. And I feel like Black women, African American women, African women, um, with all of the wonderful things that they're doing when it comes to Black Girl Magic or Black Lives Matter or being Black, they're the ones who are really thriving and really pushing it. I want you to talk about that, especially you being a Black woman, and how important it is for our younger generation to sort of take up that mantle and continue to push that.
All right, great. Especially this being Women History Month, and we know that just like Black History Month, every day
Yep, absolutely, every day.
honoring women, just as we say with Black History Month, every day is a day we celebrate our African heritage. But for certain women, Black African American women, to know that the power and the influence and the gift of influence that women have, it's a gift of influence. And so we want to use that influence to continue to build on the family of the strength of the family and the identity of the Black people coming together, African Americans coming together and knowing their culture and identity. And again, if the mom, the female, is the one that's in the most of the time with the children, again, that's the importance of reading. Dr. Ralph Gardner, he was a chemist, but anyway, but he also had in his heart, he started Mothers Read to Your Babies, and this is back in the 60s, and the importance of just, again, talking and reading and sharing who they are to them, telling them they're just beautiful, telling them, because that's that first piece of understanding that love for who we are, because that love that's coming through that mother and that nurturing of that mother. So sharing that, the beauty of to that child, and knowing who they are and knowing they're important, and then knowing that they're a gift to the world, and speaking that over them and speaking that to them. So that's why older women should again teach the younger, and the younger teach the yet younger, so we can keep it going and keep it going, keep it going. And that's part of the legacy and the heritage of the African American family, to that, be it Big Mama, or whoever, Auntie, or whoever it was. Even if it was a lady down the street that we called Auntie, who we knew wasn't really Auntie, but again, would take under, if that mother was working, or that mother had, just a lot on her mind, on her plate, somebody was there to help. And so they continue that kind of, we call it, you know, uh, fictive kin, but people that are not really related, but take on those roles. So we don't have to be blood related to continue that, to nurture and to help one another. Sometimes you see a single parent, or even someone that's not a single parent, but just a mother that needs a little help, give her that help. Need a little support, give her that support. That's how we can carry on, and that legacy of strengthening one another and not pulling each other down, but encourage. And that's what I see in this generation. I see helping, and I see working together, and I see encouraging one another. And I want to continue to see that in our young people. And I do believe it's a change. It's a change for the better, because a lot of the hurt is being addressed and it's real. So we can, another, if you wanted to see it's a great TED Talk, Confession of a D Girl. D stands for dark. You can, it's a TED Talk. You can see it on YouTube. I show it to my students, and it just kind of, and I showed it for our women's group, and you just seeing the tears. I'm talking about tears of people in their 50s and 60s and 70 years old, and then seeing that still that hurt from what they experienced from being a dark complected African American woman. So it's real, and so we have to get past those degrading one another on that, and just stop some of those little things that we thought were funny, names and such. Not funny, but hurtful. And we, not other people, we need to stop that. So we can make the difference for ourselves. We can make the difference for ourselves and not looking for anybody else to do that for us.
Okay. First off, Yolanda, I want to say you are doing a great job, a very great job. And I kind of
Awesome
want
job.
to, go a different route now. So I've watched, and I actually watched it with my son. I watched Judas and the Black Messiah. I heard about the Black Panthers, but I really wasn't educated. But the one thing that stood out to me in that movie was how a young black man that was 21 years old believed in something, believed in helping his people, believed in leading his people, and he was willing to die for it. Which, so that kind of leads me to the question I have for you. We know racism has been in this country for years, and they say we've come a long way, but yet there's all you see so many signs. To me, I look back and I say, have we really came a long way? So I just want to know, what is your stance on police brutality, on racism, and what do you think, as black people, as African Americans, what do you think we can do to try to protect ourselves more, or even to bring more light to those situations? Of course, now we have cell phones, so everything is caught on camera, but yet it's still it still happens. It's like, no matter how much it's exposed, it still happen. It'll never stop. Is there, if there is there anything we could do to to make those things stop?
Well, if I had that answer, we would all we would just shoo, make it go away. But I think it has to start with, if the who's ever, they talk about training, but in my opinion, it's not a matter of training. It's a matter of who you're picking, who are you selecting. It's a matter of, if you look into someone's background, like they did, if they do, like if I'm a, if you do a teacher that's going to teach K to 12, they're going to do a background check. They're going to do that. When you do an interview, like we tell our students, if you're going to do an interview with somebody, they're checking your Facebook page or checking your Instagram or whatever to see who your friends are. And if they're doing all that for just a regular quote unquote job, then how much more should they be doing that sort of scrutiny and really digging deeper when someone is applying to be a peace officer? So it starts with how they are really selecting and recruiting. Because if you go into some of these, those that have been, well, we haven't had too many convictions, but at least those that have been charged with brutality, you can see in their backgrounds, the signs were there, but signs not heeded. And so I think that has to be a first stop into at least those that you have clearly have issues if you're going to give them a gun and say, go out in the public. So those are some of the things. But unfortunately, I think that what most Black parents teach their sons in particular and daughters now, it's not going to change. That rites of passage, both make sure the wallet's in the registration, all that's up front, and then you're still not too sure what will happen after that. Just talk lower and slower. Yes or no. Those things part of the. We are, I believe, in society we would still have to do, and if the true change is going to have it has to be systemic. It can't just be the a Band-Aid, take that with it's only a couple bad apples. We'll just take these 2 or 3. No, it's in the system.
It's in the system.
We have to look at that. It's in the system. So we have to look at that. And again, we got to take it back in history with that little clause there, that little clause in the 13th Amendment. You can't be enslaved except if you're arrested and incarcerated, but so all of that is still part of that system that's in place that has to be, it has to be a shift. And I am a lifetime member of the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice. My husband was the past president of the state level, National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice. And that's one of the charges, to really make those differences systemically in the policies and practices, and to empower those that are that are African Americans that are in the criminal justice and law enforcement fields to get into the levels where the policies can be changed. It's about the policies. It's about the policies and the practices, and that through the legislator on down, that where the change has to occur. And as we've seen with the Black codes, laws, and Jim Crow law, blah, 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 it has to, you can't change the heart, but we can line some of the policies and practices and laws to, because some of those laws that are still in the books are just, it's crazy. Still people that have, don't still have the right to vote in some states, and just it's crazy business. We have to look at the root of those things, and again, they go all the way back. They all go all the way back to the time of getting the Reconstruction, getting rid of Reconstruction, and all those things that were in place to empower African Americans economically and civically. So anyway, long answer, but we have to, it's a lot of work to do, but it takes one at a time. Each individual can make a difference, and we've seen that over and over for those that are willing to collectively, as individuals, collectively make a difference.
Thank you for that. So I have 2 more, and then I'm gonna turn it over to my partner because he has another one. So obviously, you know a lot about your history, far and beyond about the Black history in general. Have you ever been racially profiled?
I think we all have, even if you didn't realize it.
Well, if you have, I want you to just, if you can you share the story with us to our viewers?
All these stories. Well, I'll tell you, you call it what you want to call it, but I'll tell you a situation that happened. Just going to, I was, before I, while being faculty member, I was first an administrator. So I was representing the university at a corporate event at the Loge in the in Indians, actually, in Loge. And I was the only person of color there. But I had on, my, navy blue suit and my pearls, your corporate, it was a corporate event, a traditional corporate sponsor, sponsored the Loge there. And so we were, mingle, how you do in the Loge before the game, you mingle. So there was a person standing, so I was talking with an individual, and there was a person standing outside of our discussion or conversation. So normally, as you know, when you're networking, if someone's standing there, you motion for them to partake and be a part of that conversation. So that's what I did, but the person didn't move. So the person I was talking to assumed that the person, since he were looking at me, wanted to talk with me. So, well, nice meeting you, and he walked away. So as I turned to greet this person with my hand outstretched to, to say, oh, introduce myself, and as I extended my hand, the person took their hand and pointed toward the seating area, because we were inside the loge, and then the other seating areas, toward where people were in the game. And he says, the lady would like a drink. I said, excuse me?
Wow.
He said, the lady would like a drink. And you could hear a pin drop. You could hear every total silence.
He repeated it too.
And he had the nerve to, like, as if I was hard. I said, I thought he like, okay, no. He had the nerve to repeat it. And again, you could hear a pin drop. And so I don't know what I look like, but his eyes, I don't know what continents came over me, but his eyes got big as saucers. And he turned beet red and he says, the lady can get her own drink. I said, yes, the lady can get her own drink.
And while she at it, make sure she get me one too.
That's what my dad said when I went, because I was so, because as old as I am, when I got home, I didn't go home. I went to my parents' house and told my parents what happened. And he said, he should have told him, get me one too, exactly what you said. But isn't that terrible?
Yeah.
What do you call a black man with $1 million?
A millionaire.
A nigga.
I know.
Yeah, I know you know. But I only bring that up because
there's 1,000 different ways to be called. Nobody has to call you that, but there's 1,000 ways they can call you that without calling you that.
Oh yeah.
And that's what that person saw, even though I'm there. But again, the traditional navy blue suit, pearls, and my pumps. It didn't make a difference because that's all they saw.
Did they apologize?
Yes. Well, they'll tell you what happened, because I was like, oh my gosh. So then, okay. And then the other thing that was kind of corny, because the person that invited myself, the corporate, well, it was their company was the corporate sponsor, but they hadn't arrived there yet. So when they came and I guess nobody know, because it was still this silence. I mean, it was dead silence still. And then somebody comes over and said, oh, we would love her to work with that. We would love her to be part of our company. So they played it off as if, the person was thinking I was a host with the company or something. I don't know. They tried to play it off that way. So that broke. So they all said, oh yeah, we've been there. They all, oh yes, we would love for her to be. But the person because they didn't know me, none of them knew me, because the person that invited me wasn't there yet. So when he came, the person that invited came in. We went and sat down, and my colleague was there. My colleague was with who is this European male colleague. I think I was actually his supervisor. And so we sat and we watched, we were there for like 45 minutes into the game. And then he said, do you want to go? I said, yeah. Yeah. So we left. Yeah. So.
Wow.
The person did come up and say, I apologize, but he got in on that. Oh, because we thought you were,
I knew you had a good one. That's why I asked. I knew you had a good one.
Yeah. It's
very unfortunate. And it's something they had Bob Johnson on the Breakfast Club, and he gave a similar story. He said that you saw that. He said, he would be out front at a restaurant waiting for his car, his brand new sports car. Somebody would come up and hand him the keys, like he's the valet.
I mean,
but
Yeah, right. If you like,
Right.
you be there, right? Right.
Right, exactly. And then he told the story. He had bought, he built BET, he's got all this money and whatnot. He bought his daughter a 200-acre horse farm in a prominent area in Virginia because she was a equestrian. He goes into, I don't know if it's the stable house or whatever, and the guy is in there doing some work. Now he hired this guy. I don't think he knew that the guy he was working for was
Mm,
black.
mm.
So he walks in and the guy looks at him. He said, "Hey, if you here to sweep up, you better hurry up because the boss will be here soon." And so Bob Johnson said, "Look, this is what he said. He said he thought about it for a second, and he was like, 'Nah, I don't think I'm gonna do any sweeping today,' and
Uh,
just left back out, right? But he said, 'Man, you know, it still happens. No matter how successful you are,
exactly.
educated you are, how well you speak or whatever
Exactly.
that means.
Whatever that means, right?
Yeah, and so I." I've been profiled, Willie. I'm sure you've been profiled, and I'm glad you brought that up. We've all been profiled. I want to get into this because we've unpacked a lot. We definitely want to have you back on. We've gone from Africa to America to the rest of the world, but let's bring it back to the nuclear family
Mm,
because the family is what has been disrupted in our community. He just talked about Judas and the Black Messiah, and J. Edgar Hoover's primary mission above organized crime was to disrupt Negro unity.
that's
And back
correct.
then, black families were very close knit because that's all we had.
That's right.
But nowadays, they're throwing out all these different agendas to disrupt the family. So we're seeing more divorce than
That's
we've ever
correct.
seen.
That's
We're
correct.
seeing, I mean, I don't know if there's a culture where the men compete against the women, but it's definitely in our culture. I wanted you to delve into that because that's so important, and that's how our civilizations were built.
Right.
I wanted you to talk about the importance of that, having unity within the family and being on one accord.
Oh, that's a great question. And because it's so important, it is, again, we know the roots of it. We don't have to go there again. We know the roots of it from from again the enslavement and having the women feel that they had no protection when the male is watching the female being raped and taken away, child stand, and the man can't do it's a demasculization of the male figure in African American family, and to just strip that and to see that he can't do anything for you. So you have to depend on me, the slave master, or government, whatever you want to look at it, right? And so we have to look at that and say, why is it that even back in the horrors of slavery, that African American families would risk life and limb to be reunited, risk leave one plantation to get to the other, just to find their spouse, just to find their sibling, just to find their child. And then after slavery was over, how they just went everywhere trying to find, trying to reconnect. And we can see documentation, U.S. Census, Department, all these other, you can look at that the family households were together was way over 70, but even 80% up until the 60s. What happened? What happened? What happened? What happened? We can point to the Moynihan report, part to whatever you want, but you can point to some of these policies that came in place to make it a disadvantage or even punitive for the family to be together. So we have to be careful when someone comes along trying to hand something to see what they're going to take away. So,
Wow.
so we have to be always look at that. So, be mindful. So we have to look at that. We need one another. We've always worked together. Maya Angelou had she did a prelude to a song. She said, She said, when we were in the fields, we were together. She named all these things, we were together. So we have to look at why is it now that we're not together? So we have to really take another look at that and make sure that we don't, again, what comes out of our mouths, speaking negative about one another. And that's why I do have to, I'm not all that pleased with some of our music artists, I use that term lightly, that
No, go ahead and speak on it, because
yeah,
we know exactly what you're talking about.
they have some accountability. You can't blame European Americans for all of this. You got a role to play when you felt that the money was more than the family value, when the money was more worth than the dignity of your sister and your mother and your auntie, okay, and your daughter. You would need that money more. So that you got a problem. Which created a problem where you could able to call out a name that we wouldn't dare, that you wouldn't dare call someone else of a different persuasion that, because you would have got hung, even if you blinked at them, and even if you didn't even wink at them, like Emmett Till didn't do anything, but got lied on and was tortured and killed. And so you wouldn't have dared, you were trained not to say certain things to other people, but now you just feel free that you can say anything and call anything to your beautiful sister.
I'm so glad you went there, because I don't really listen to rap music, so it's not in my house. Only time my kids will hear it is if they go to school and somebody else. So my wife was telling me she lets the kids pick a song each morning while they're on their way to school. And my oldest picked one. And I remember her texting me earlier this week, like, hey, you need to have a talk with your son. She gave me the situation. It was a song, and she's like, I didn't know what the song was, but the song started off pretty much him saying, I'm ready to die, this, that, and the third, calling women all types of names and stuff. So I remember, and I was trying to figure out, okay, what route am I going to take to talk to my son? So I remember pulling him in the room. I was like, I want to hear the song you wanted to listen to. So he started off, and it started off, well, I'm ready to go, something like that, whatever it was. But I was like, man, do you know what he's talking about? Do you know what he's saying? He's saying he's ready to die. He's saying he's calling. I'm like, first off, you have a sister. You have a little sister. Like, he's calling women all types of names, all like, and then here on there, he's using these words he shouldn't be using. Like, I'm like, do you think a kid should be listening to this type of music? And what really made me, because where I'm going with this is it starts at the home. And I told him, like, you don't listen to this music here. Mom and I don't listen to this. So you're getting it from some of the kids from school. And I was like, do you think they should be listening to this music? He's like, no, I don't think it is. So it starts, the culture starts in the home. The foundation starts in the home. And we talk about that a lot here on this podcast, that if the foundation is bad, the house is not going to stand up. You cannot build a house without a foundation, without a solid ground. You can't. So, and to me, and it's saddening when I see, because I'm not saying everybody is you can raise your kids the way you want to, but to me, it's saddening when I see kids going in the wrong directions, but the parents think it's normal. The parents think it's just the way it is. And to me, that continues what we like to call in our household, we call it the generational curse. The curse will never be broken until someone realizes that, you know what, this is not the way. This ain't the way it's supposed to be. I love Alex and I because we always pound this on the table. It's more to Black people than just being an athlete or a rapper or entertainer. You could go be a lawyer, you could be a doctor, it's so much more. Like, when they look at us, the first thing they see is, oh, that's an athlete. I bet he plays sports. If you see a tall Black guy, the first thing you think, even now, I still think it, man, he got to play basketball.
Right.
So we're so trapped in the mind. And again, it all falls back to the foundation and the culture that's set at home. We set this culture, and then we send our kids out to the wolves.
Right. Well, you said so much, so powerful, what you were saying.
Preach, Willie,
We
preach.
train people how you want to be treated. So when we say these things about ourselves, you're really giving license for others to do the same, even though they may not be as bold to say it, but they're going to think it, and you're reinforcing that stereotype. You are giving credibility to these lies and myths that Black women are just this, stanks or whatever, things that, that negative things that we would hear or be portrayed about Black women and black people in general. And if they want the money more, then to your point, it's up to the parent in the home or to know that it's not acceptable. And it's not acceptable because that's not who I am. And that's not who you are. So no matter if someone else is making $1 million off of it, that's not what we are going to portray. That's not what we are going to allow, to your point. And I think it's in another side of that that needs to be taught. If you don't know, if someone didn't know any better, so to speak, and that's why we could teach, like, hey, is that sounds like your mom? No, well then let's no, it doesn't. Does it sound like your grandma? No. So let's do something different. Let's say something different. And we want to talk about life and living and enjoying things that life that you can have and how you can get to that life that you want to have and start just turning that around with conversation. That's why dialogue is going to be important, just like you did with your son. Everybody may not have that dad in that home to do that, but you can be that. And that's where that neighbor, that village principle comes in. You may be able to be that to someone else's son. You may be that example that for someone else's, or I may to someone else's daughter, myself, or that's why we have to not just look within our own households and think of us as a broader family unit, that bigger community, and have a responsibility. So, well, that's not my, well, we are. How one goes, it's going to affect the all. When someone looks at me, they're going to see it's not the first time that person did that to somebody, I'm sure. I think he won't do it again, but I believe that wasn't his first time because it's in the mindset. So we want to again change those mindsets, but we have to start with ourselves. I believe it has to start with us. It really does. It really does. And again, in the family unit and what we call the family, and I believe that family is whoever supports you and your goals for in the positive, whoever makes a positive impact on your life. That's your family. That's your family. So we don't have to go by with a biological or anything of that nature. Family has to be those that are supporting you and speaking life to you and help you to. Sometimes you have to, unfortunately, go outside of the family and then come back and bring those things back to the family, your biological family. But sometimes you do have to go outside. It may be a little tough, but sometimes you do have to go outside of that family when you know that it's not feeding you positively, okay, and it's doing harm.
Yolanda, what are your final thoughts? What do you want the people to know? We unpacked a lot here tonight on the beginning of our history, not just the beginning that they want us to know, right? The
Right.
bondage and the whips and the change, but the greatness, how civilization started and how we influenced and impacted the entire world all the way up until where we are today. But if you were to share some final thoughts, what would you tell the people?
I will tell the people, like I said, I think in the beginning, you are who God says we are. And that foundation, for me, in my house, we will serve the Lord, and to know who God says you are. And it can't be anybody outside of that, no greater, no bigger, that can tell me otherwise. And that's the foundation. That's the foundation. And if you know that, then you can build on the history, and we can look at the gifts that God has given us as a people. You can see it. I mean, you can see it in the books. You can see it in the history. You can see it through the archaeology. You can see all these gifts that's given, and what we do with them, what we have done with them. That's and what we will continue to do with them. That's on us. We've been given the divine right to live, not because the Constitution says so, or the Declaration of Independence says so. We've been given the divine right to be who we are called to be, and that's a great people, to be a blessing to great people, to impart our gifts and to use it to the betterment not only of our own community, but for others. And everybody has that responsibility. Each individual has that responsibility to give their best to their own family first, and then to the community at large. We have the right for that. We have the right to that. We have the right to that, and to always know that, and to build upon it. So you just can't just take that. If that's like anything, you have to build on it. You have to grow it. And I would encourage everyone to do just that. Grow the gifts that you've been given, and to know it's just not for you and yours. It's for the broader sense of community, the broader family, and in the global community. But it starts at home. It starts with you, and it starts with your own circle of influence. We all have an influence, so we ought to use it and gain your knowledge, grow knowledge, read. I don't care if they say everything's on the internet. Pick up a book every night. and or you get off the internet. I'm not mad at the internet, but just begin to read, and then to really do some critical thinking for yourself, and to say, I know I'm here for a purpose. And I know I'm here for a purpose. And I wanted to find that out even more so. And I'm willing to do what it takes to be at my best, at my greatness. And that's what I would encourage everyone to do, and support one another in doing that, and support one another as we do that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You mentioned books. Give me your top 3 books, recommended reading. And even if you want to do more than 3, that's fine. But what recommended reading would you tell the audience to go and pick up?
All right, outside of the Bible, number 1. And number 2, there's a wonderful book, and I have, I don't know if you can see it. Well, you may not have to see it. We have so many great books. I have a lot of books on our shelves. But Maya Angelou's book, I know why the cage bird sings, with her collection. It's inspiring. I would encourage people to really, any of her works are really speak to the heart. And some of the books that I really like are more biographies. I don't know if people are really into biographies all that much, but there's some really great biographies that if you want to, one of my favorite, I don't know if you, well, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. Some of the books written earlier on by Langston Hughes and Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells, who led the charge against lynching. Global activists, and some of the old. Just to get your hands on those 3. I do Colin Powell's autobiography. It's a wonderful read. Colin Powell, first Black Chief Justice, and what's my other biography? His biography. What is I think that's a nice call for if you go with those. It's a diverse, and that way you give you a little bit of balance. It's not all. Um, I think those are the ones I'd pick out for you to read. I was gonna. It's so dark, and I just noticed it's so dark in here. I can't even. You wouldn't be able to see this one. So I'm sorry, I didn't have the lights on. When I moved from the window, there's no lights on. But I don't
No,
know.
no, it's okay. I mean, it was still an incredible interview. And Yolanda, how can the people get in touch with you? How can our audience reach you?
Okay, you can go into our info at mountpleasantheritagehouse.org. And that's the email address. Be happy to, I'll email you back. And it's information about our foundation or a nonprofit that's our goal and our mission is to promote and preserve the rich culture and heritage of the African diaspora, as well as other ethnic groups, but in particular the African diaspora. So again, info at mountpleasantheritagehouse.org, and that's MT, no period, MT Pleasant Heritage House.org.
Well, all right. Willie, you got anything else, brother?
There's no way I'm gonna say something after all that knowledge, man. That's a mic drop, man.
Uh,
Yeah, I definitely think we need to have back on for part two because there's a
Absolutely.
lot to unpack. And we want to say thank you, and we greatly appreciate you being able to take the time out of your day to share this wisdom, to share this history, all of this greatness with us and our audience. I hope you guys learned something. And it's the Black Culture Podcast. Peace.
Peace out.
Blessings.